Welcome back to what are we on? Part 5? I think we're on part 5. Part 5 of our series on the TD Ameritrade API client library for Python. So in our last video, we basically wrapped up the authentication portion of our client object. So we had written all the code necessary to basically go through the authentication process. In this particular video, we're going to go through the testing of it. So we're going to test some things out. We want to make sure it works because obviously if authentication doesn't work, then it's going to be really hard to do anything beyond authentication. We can't make requests because we're not authenticated and things along that nature. Now, I will let you know, I was looking over my code the other day and I realized two things. First, I left something out, and so I want to go over the stuff that I left out. I'm kind of surprised I left it out because I'm like, that's kind of an important line, so I'm kind of upset with myself for doing that. And then the other thing I'm going to talk about is an error that I'm encountering on Visual Studios and the workaround that I need to do in order to make it work. So if you remember correctly, I'll use my old client library to kind of give you some context. Remember that we have a method called the state manager. And so the state manager is managing the state of our client object at any given point in time in our script. So it's going to do things like initialize to the default state. And then if we have a change in state, it will allow us to save that state to a JSON file. The important thing about the state manager is it allows us to do things like silent authentication, because if we initialize the state using the previous values we were using in a previous session, then we can then leverage things like the refresh token and then the access token and make a request to the refresh token endpoint. So that's really important because what that means is we don't have to log in every single time we want to go through this process. However, there's a couple things that I was noticing right around here. So basically inside the state manager, there's one of two actions. There's init or there's save. Init is basically initializing a brand new state. Saving is saving a state at any given point in time. With the init method, all it's doing is it's going to this file name up here, and it's going to load the previous values if caching has been allowed. If it's not been allowed, then what it's going to do is it's going to delete that file. So if caching has been allowed and we're initializing the state, it's going to read the previous values if there are any. If caching has not been allowed, then it's just going to delete that file altogether, and then you're going to be required to go through a full authentication process. So that's the init portion of it, and then there's the save portion. The save portion writes the existing state to that same JSON file that we were reading up here. So in this particular one, we're just reading it. In the save portion of it, we're actually writing to it. So to start things off, when we're writing to it, I don't know why I missed this. We have to have this line of code that actually builds the JSON string that we're going to be storing in the JSON file. And so all I'm doing at this particular line is I've declared a new variable called JSON string, and I'm using dictionary comprehension where I loop through each key in the initialized state, and then I say key.self.state, and then I grab the value. So I basically grab the value for that particular key. So I build my JSON string, and then I dump that JSON string to the particular, JSON file. So that's all I'm doing there. I think in the last video, I had mentioned that I wasn't supposed to do this or something like that. That's basically kind of not correct. I should be doing this line. Or what could have just happened is because I'm encountering this little particular error initially, we might still be able to remove it, but I want to verify that this error is taken care of first before I remove this line. So that's the first correction. The second correction. Well, the second correction has to do with this wonderful guy up here. So the file name. For whatever reason, and I'm not really sure why, if I run my code in Visual Studio Code, this will always return false. Even though if I go into that directory, and I'll show you, even if I go into that directory, you will see the JSON file. So even though it exists, for whatever reason, Visual Studios will say this will actually return a false. And so there's a big problem with that. This is never reached. So if I have caching set to false and it's saying that the file name doesn't exist, well, guess what? It will never remove that actual file. Or if it does, it will try to attempt to delete the file and you'll get an error at the end of the day. So for whatever reason, I'm not really sure why Visual Studios was doing that. It's not able to recognize the actual working directory of where this Python script is. It seems to only reference the directory where the Python basically the Python that you're running lives. So for mine, it exists in my Anaconda folder. For some reason, it's only able to look in that folder for this particular file. And so every time it's looking there, it's just seeing that it's not there, so it's saying false. So what I had to do instead as a workaround, at least temporarily, is I actually build the full path to my particular file. And so I'm still kind of debating about what the long-term solution to this problem is, but this was creating a working solution. So this was at least my temporary workaround. All I'm doing is I'm providing the full path to this particular directory. I'm probably going to have to do something like just get the current working directory or something like that and see if that kind of fixes the issue. But at this point, this is kind of our temporary workaround. So you basically have to create the file path from scratch. And then what you do is you then test if that is a file. And when you do that, this will return the correct value. So this is kind of at least our temporary workaround to make sure this runs properly. Otherwise, even if they don't allow for caching, it's never going to delete the file because it's never going to see that file. Or it will see the file, but when you get to this line, this will throw an error. So it's kind of just this weird bug, I guess, at this point. I guess you can change this within Visual Studio code, but I've got to look into that a little bit more. However, I just want to let people know, because if you are coding this in Visual Studio, you might run into the same problem. And so if you do, this is your temporary workaround until I can kind of get a more quote unquote stable solution. So that was related to the items that I missed on State Manager. The last item that I do want to talk about is actually under our init method. So this is the initialization method every time we create a new instance of our client object. And with this one, again, for whatever reason, I never actually went through the update quargs line. All this line is doing is it's taking the values that were passed through during the initialization process, and it's going to update this dictionary to match whatever was passed through. So if I pass through my account number, for example, then all of a sudden my account number will show up here. If I pass through my account password, then my account password will show up here. So I said that multiple times during this portion of the video, but for whatever reason, I didn't actually add this line where I'm saying, hey, actually go and update the items. It's not super complicated, again, because our configuration attribute is really just a dictionary. We can use the update methods, and then we can pass through the quargs items. And so because the keywords argument is basically just a dictionary, we can utilize it just like a dictionary and call the items method, which will then update each of the keys and values to their appropriate settings. So that's really all this is doing. It's a very important part, because if you try to change default behavior like cache state or refresh enabled or anything like that, technically it would never update it. So it's just going to go back to the default value. So this is definitely an important line, and you want to make sure you keep it in your code. So with that being said, I think I covered everything that I missed potentially in that last video. Again, just as a reminder, the update quarg items was one that I missed. Additionally, the state manager. So I wanted to bring up the bug that we were encountering. And then additionally, building the JSON string. And then just as a reminder, I still might remove this one if I can verify that once this issue is fixed, that everything will still be fine. But I still kind of have to double check everything. I think technically it might be a little bit hard. No, you should be able to, because then technically everything would be updated. But yeah, I'll kind of look at it a little bit more. So it might change a little bit, but nothing super crazy at this point. So with that being said, though, let's get to actually testing our particular client object using the library. So all I'm doing is I have my TD API file. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to say from TD API, import my TD client object. And then I have a second config file that contains my account number, my account password, my redirect URI, and my consumer ID. So these are all the pieces of information I need in order to do a successful login and authentication for the particular API that I'm using. Now, because this is kind of sensitive information, I do have it in a separate file. However, if you want, you can kind of get an idea of what it's going to look like. It's pretty much exactly what you would see here, but instead of being none, it's going to be the associated values that normally go with that particular variable. So nothing super crazy. So now that we've done that, let's create a new session. And what I'm going to do first is I'm going to set the default behavior to cache state false. So if I set cache state false, basically what it's going to do is, well, it should do, is this particular JSON file, it should delete it. So that means that when we run it, that JSON file should no longer exist. So we'll call this method 1. And with this one, we're going to initialize a new session with your account information and set caching to false. And so pretty straightforward. We're going to do TD session, and we're going to say that equals TD client. We're going to do the account number. So this is the account number we want to pass through. Well, that's just my account number that I have in my config file. And then the next one will be my account password. And with this one, again, it will be my account password. And then I'm going to have my, my redirect URI. And that one is going to be my redirect URI. So that's just the redirect URL in a sense of when we sign up. And then we have our consumer ID, and this is kind of like used interchangeably. Sometimes we call it consumer ID, sometimes we use it as client ID. Again, they're kind of one and the same. And then I also want to change a default behavior of my particular, client object by setting caching equal to false. So basically all that means is it will not save any of the information to that JSON file. Okay, so once we've done that, we've kind of created a new session. Now we want to log in to the new session. So log in to the new session. And so this should run us through the authentication process. So we'll do TD session, and then we'll do login. And once we've done that, I also want to display some information back to the user. So what we'll do is we'll first print the logged in status. And so we'll say print TD session. If we go into the state property, there is a key called logged in, and then this contains our logged in status. So it's either I think it's like true or false or something. Maybe it's logged in or not. I think it's true or false, something like that. But basically this will display if we've been logged in or not. And then additionally, we have an authentication state, which will say whether we've been authenticated or not authenticated. So print the authentication state. And then so we'll grab our TD session, and then again there is an attribute called auth state, and we'll just wrap that all in a print function. So this is method 1. This is the longer method when it comes to logging. So this should ask for a full credential process and everything like that. So once I've done that, I'm going to run my code, and I'm going to kind of close this just to give you enough space. And then we'll say run Python file from terminal. Perfect. So Oh, goodness. Let me maybe run it again because I want to kind of give you everything. Where is it? Perfect. Okay, so everything looks good so far. What it did is it created our URL, and all it's asking us to do is please go to the URL provided by your, to authorize your account. So everything is good. So in Visual Studios, it's pretty simple. You just do Control click, a little pop-up will happen. You just can say open link. Oh, I was like, there's two windows, shouldn't be two windows. That's just the default one. So now I'm gonna go and be prompted to log in. So I would just pass through my user ID and then my password. And then you would, of course, agree. And then you're gonna notice that at the top, your URL is gonna change. So now it's gonna take you to your redirect. From here, now we can keep going forward. We're just gonna grab that. We want to copy it, and then we want to put it back. And so we'll say paste the full redirect URI here. And then so we'll just do that. And you can see, oh, it's a massive URL, not fun. Perfect. And so now we can also see that it returned true and it's been authenticated. So that's great. So we have now logged in and we are authenticated. Let's see if there was a JSON file. So it looks like there's no JSON file, which that's actually good too, because remember, we had caching set to false, so nothing was saved. So let's change this a little bit, and let's say input caching equal to true. Now, because our previous request, we did not allow for caching, we're still gonna have to go through the full authentication process again, because it doesn't have anything else it can reference that was there. However, after the first login, we should be good to go. So what we'll do is, again, we'll just run it. Okay, perfect. So you would just go to that URL and just say okay. And so you would again provide your user ID and your password, and you would just say allow. Okay, so you're good. Copy your code. And then from here, you would then just pass it through. Okay, looks good. So you got true and authenticated. So everything seems to be working pretty well so far. What I'm going to do now is, because the default behavior is cache state true, I just can take that portion out. So basically, again, the default value is true. So if I don't specify it, it's going to be set to true. Now, hopefully with my second login, I shouldn't have to do anything, because now, if you look here, there is a new JSON file that was created. So that JSON file contains all the information from our previous session. And so if I go here, I right click and I do it again, looks like it was good. So it says I am logged in, and guess what? I'm authenticated. So this is really where this library shines. It is basically taking out the process of having to do a full authentication every single time. Now you don't have to worry about it. You can just use your previous values and you'll be good to go. And if you were to delete that file by accident or something like that, it still works fine. It's just going to go right through the authentication process again. So nothing super crazy. But that's basically it for this video. It's just, again, testing out our client object and then going over some of those points that I discussed earlier related to one of the bugs, and then also some items I missed. So if at this point you have any questions about what I was doing or kind of how we got here, feel free to put them down in the comments below, and I will try to get back to you. In the second portion of this library, we're going to start building our request, and we're going to start talking about things like validating our request, validating the input parameters, and things along that nature. So you can basically consider the portion related to authentication closed. We have now done that portion. The code I probably post on GitHub, it's probably going to change some more, just because, again, there's a couple things I've got to address. So this is obviously a big one. Where else is this one? I've got to address this one because I've got to make this more generic, so that way it works with everyone who's using it. So nice thing, this one's not too bad. That's pretty straightforward. This one, yeah, might need to change a little bit, but nothing super crazy. So I'd say not too much would change, but don't expect it to be a perfect copy of what you might see on GitHub. So thank you again for watching, everybody. We'll see you in the next portion.